Welcome to AzureTeach.net. In this demo, let us see Azure AD Authentication using certificate for ASP.NET Core Web App. We are going to develop the application using ASP.NET Core, and after that we are going to deploy the application to Azure App Service. For this demo, we need an Azure Key Vault and an app registration which I have already created. If you don't know how to create these two, you can refer to my full tutorial on Azure Key Vault by clicking on the I symbol which is there at the top of this video. Let us create a certificate. Here I am inside the Azure Key Vault Certificates tab. I am clicking on Generate Import, and here I am choosing the Generate option. If you have an existing certificate, you can choose Import option. I am giving the name as Demo Cert, and here I am choosing self-signed certificate. If you want to issue the certificate by an integrated or non-integrated CA, you can choose other two options. I am going with the self-signed certificate. I am giving the subject as CN equal to Azure Teach.net, and here I'm choosing the validity period as 12. I don't want to add any DNS name. Here I want to choose PKCS#12 content type. The other option that is available is PAM. So this is some kind of text-based encryption, and this is more secured encryption, so I'm choosing this one. And here we have lifetime action type. So based on these two parameters, the certificate will automatically renew. So as we are choosing 80%, here the certificate will be automatically renewed once 80% of its lifetime is reached. I'm clicking on this not configured. Here we have different options available, but I want to go with the default options, and I'm clicking on create. Here if you see, the certificate is disabled. It will be enabled once the certificate is created completely. Let me do refresh over here. So if you see, it is enabled. So that means the certificate is created and ready for use. Now let us use this certificate for Azure AD authentication. I'm clicking on this certificate. I'm going into the current version, and here we have two types of certificate formats available. This is the CAR format. This will have the public key. This can be shared with anybody who needs access to your application using Azure AD. And the other one will have public and private key. It should stay with the development team only. It should not be shared with anybody. And we have to upload this public key to Azure app registration, as we have to use this certificate for Azure AD authentication. So I'm clicking on this to download this. I'm clicking on keep over here. Now I'm going into the Azure Active Directory and to the app registrations, and here I'm going into the Key Vault console app and going to certificates and secrets. Here I'm going into the certificates and I'm uploading the certificate. I'm choosing the certificate and clicking on add. The certificate added successfully over here. If you see here we have the thumbprint of the certificate. Now we are going to create a .NET Core web app and fetch token for Azure Graph API using certificate authentication. By default, every app registration will have user.read permission on Azure Graph API. If you want to read Azure AD user details, we can use Graph API. There are two types of permission model, delegated and application permissions. If you see here, this is the delegated permission, which will use the logged in user's credentials to fetch the token from Azure Graph API. In this demo, we are going to fetch the token to access Graph API. But if you want more information on Azure Graph API, please refer to the I symbol that is there at the top right corner of this video. The channel already have two good videos on Azure Graph API. Here I'm creating a new ASP.NET Core MVC project. I'm clicking on next. I'm giving the name as Cert Azure AD Tutorial. I'm clicking on next. I'm clicking on create. The project is created and I have added the required NuGet packages Microsoft.Identity.Web and Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. In this demo, we are going to use certificate-based authentication, but if you want to use secret-based Azure AD authentication, in the channel, the videos are already available. You can click on the I symbol that is there at the top. First, we have to configure the Azure AD details inside our appsettings.json. So here I'm writing Here I'm creating a new ASP.NET Core MVC project. I'm clicking on next. I'm giving the name as Cert Azure AD Tutorial. I'm clicking on next. I'm clicking on create. The project is created and I have added the required NuGet packages Microsoft.Identity.Web and Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. In this demo, we are going to use certificate-based authentication, but if you want to use secret-based Azure AD authentication in the channel, the videos are already available. You can click on the I symbol that is there at the top. First, we have to configure the Azure AD details inside our appsettings.json. So here I'm writing Azure AD. We have to pass few parameters over here, that is tenant ID. I'll write the code and after that I'll explain it. And here we have to pass instance. It should be login.microsoftonline.com. And after that we have to pass client ID and also callback path. So it will be /signin -OIDC. OIDC stands for OpenID Connect. And here we have to pass client certificate. It's an array and we can get the tenant ID from our app registration. So I'm going to the overview section. So here we have the tenant ID. I'm pasting the tenant ID over here. Here we have the client ID. I'm pasting the client ID over here. And now we have to add our Key Vault configuration. So here the source type will be Key Vault and we have to mention the Key Vault URL and also Key Vault certificate name. Our certificate name is DemoCert. Writing DemoCert over here. And I am copying the Key Vault URL and pasting it over here. So what is happening here, when this application is running, it will redirect it to this URL and it will get authenticated using this tenant ID and client ID. Once the authentication is successful, it will redirect to this particular URI with the token and we'll use that token. As we are going to call Azure Graph API, we need to use this client certificates authentication. So that's the reason we have configured the certificates and the Key Vault details over here. As we get token on this endpoint, we have to create that endpoint in our application, and for that it is not needed to write any code. We can right click here and add, and after that we have to choose new scaffolded item. We can use the classes which are there in the identity library. Click on add. It will open this window and here we have to choose account/login. And here we have to add a data context class. We can click on this. So it will show us a default class name. We can add this and click on add. It will not be successful on the first attempt because we have to add entity framework related libraries. But if you try it for the second time, it will be done. So here I am clicking on the add button. It should fail now. So it is failed now. Click on OK and click on add again. Now it generated the scaffolding items. So if you go here, it added this area and inside this it added identity. And here we have account/login. We are not going to modify these files. Now let us modify Startup.cs class. Here I am adding a namespace using Microsoft.Identity.Web. And I'm scrolling here and here I'm adding services.AddMicrosoftWebAppIdentityAuthentication as we are using web app over here. And to this we have to pass the configuration object and also we have to pass the Azure AD configuration name. Here we have Azure AD value as the default parameter and we gave the same name over here. So if you use a different name which is specific to your project, you have to pass it as that is a default parameter. I am not passing it now. As we are going to call the downstream API, so here we are going to call the Microsoft Azure Graph. So for that we have to add this enable token accessation to call downstream API. So it will acquire the token and cache it in the memory to call the Graph API. So for that we have to use this. And after that I am calling add in-memory token cache. And after that we have to configure MVC option to use the authentication. So here I'm writing services.add_MVC core. And here we have a overload which accepts options. And inside this we have to pass this as lambda. I'll explain it after writing the code. So here we have to build a policy. So I'm writing policy, new authorization policy builder, press Ctrl dot over here. So we have to add this namespace, and after that we have to call require authenticated user, and after that here we are calling build method. After that we have to add this policy to the filters. So here I'm writing options.filters.add new authorize filter. Press Ctrl dot over here. We have to add this namespace, and inside this we have to pass policy, and after that here after routing we have to add app.use authentication. Now I'm going to the controllers, and in the home controller here I'm adding iToken acquisition as dependency, iToken acquisition. Press Ctrl dot over here, and we have to add this namespace underscore token acquisition. This class will help us retrieving the token from the Azure. So before that, let me explain this. So what's going on here? Here we have added Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI, and after that, as we have to call Azure Graph API, we need to acquire the token and preserve it somewhere. And here we are enabling the token acquisition. So it will add all the dependencies which are required for this iToken acquisition interface. And after that, we are preserving the token inside the memory cache so that we can use it as and when we want. And after that, here we are configuring the MVC core options, and we are building a policy and telling the MVC framework that we need an authenticated user, and we are adding this policy to the filter. And after that, as we are going to use the authentication, we are calling app.use authentication middleware. Now go to home controller, and here add the dependency iToken acquisition, and assign this token acquisition to underscore token acquisition. So here where token is equal to, I'm writing underscore token acquisition dot get token for app async. So here we are going to get the token for app. App means the app registration that we have created. And here inside this, we need to add a scope. As we are going to call Azure Graph API, we have to add the scope related to that. And here I'm writing the scope. So here I'm writing https:// graph. Let me keep this in a separate line, graph.microsoft.com. And here I'm passing default scope. As this is an async method, I want to take the result directly. So I'm writing the result over here. We have to do few more configurations, but I want to run this solution right now so that we will get the errors and we can learn from the errors. So I'm running this application right now. So here it redirected to Azure login page. Here if you see, this is the instance ID that we have configured, and this is the tenant ID, and this is the client ID. We have configured all these things inside our appsettings.json. So here I'm using one of the users who is there inside my Azure directory to log in. I'm clicking on next, and here I'm entering the password and clicking on sign in. Skip for now. Now it should give us an error. So here if you see, it is saying an error, no reply address is registered for this application. So we have to configure the redirect address inside the app registration. So inside Visual Studio, go to Solution Explorer, expand the properties, launch settings.json, and copy this port. Go to your app registration, authentication, and add platform. Click on this web and type https://localhost : the port number /sign-in-oidc. So this is what we have configured in appsettings.json. Click on configure. You can add as many platforms as you want. If you want to run this application in multiple environments, you can add multiple platforms over here. Let us run this program again. Now let us log in for this user. So here I'm writing the password, sign in, skip for now, click on yes, and now it gives us a different error. So it says accessing the key vault is forbidden. So here it mentioned the key vault name. Why it is forbidden? because the user with which we have done login in the Visual Studio doesn't have access to the Key Vault. I'm stopping the solution. Here, if you see here, this is the user with which I logged into the Visual Studio, and this user should have permissions to the Key Vault. If you deploy this application to any other environments, there won't be any Visual Studio and you won't have this user, right? So there you have to use the managed identities. Here we have to give permissions to this user on the Key Vault. Why we have to give permissions to that user? Because here we have configured the client certificates for authentication. So to access this Key Vault to get the client certificate, internally it uses the logged in user. So we have to give the permissions. Now I'm inside the Key Vault, going to access policies and clicking on add access policy, and I'm selecting the first one, and here selecting the principal. So our user is new user. I'm selecting this. I'm clicking on select button, clicking on add. Now we have to click on the save button. Now let us run this solution again. I'm clicking on skip. Now the application is running successfully. Let us keep a breakpoint over here to see the token. I'm doing refresh. It hit the breakpoint. And this is the token that we got to access Graph API. So if you want a tutorial on accessing the Graph API, you can click on the info symbol that is there at the top. Before we wrap it up, let us discuss about a critical issue. You may encounter this issue if you are using Azure Key Vault Certificate Authentication. Here I have logged in with my admin user account inside the Visual Studio, and this user has permissions on the Key Vault. Let me run this program now. Earlier for other user, we were able to get the token, but if you see now, I'm skipping this, it shows this issue. Why this issue is happening? So we have logged in with our admin user, but this is working for a user who is there inside the Azure tenant. This admin user is also there inside the Azure tenant, but there is a problem. So if you see here, the domain is outlook.com, but other user with which we have logged in before has this domain. So it is assuming that we are trying to connect to the Key Vault using multi-tenant. So that's the reason it is giving error. We have to do some configurations to avoid this issue. Stop the solution. Right click on the project, go to properties, and here add few environment variables. Here I'm writing Azure client ID. Here we have to give the client ID. So we have the client ID over here. And also we have to add Azure tenant ID, and we have to give the tenant ID. Add it over here. Now save the properties. Now run the solution. It should work now. If for now, so it hit the breakpoint and we got the token. Why it was not working before and why it is working now? So here if you see, the admin user has outlook.com as a domain. In Azure, there can be multiple users who have outlook.com as a domain. So it is not possible to identify the directory of the user. So that's the reason it is complaining that we are trying to access using multi-tenants. So that's the reason here we have configured the tenant ID and also the client ID. So when we run the application based on the tenant ID and the client ID, it will decide the directory to which this user belongs to. So that's how it is working now. In this demo, we have used Key Vault certificates for authentication, but if you want to use app registration secrets for the authentication, you can click on the I symbol that is there at the top. Now let us create a web app inside Azure. I'm clicking on create a resource. Here I'm choosing web app, clicking on create. And here I'm creating a new resource group, RG cert demo group. I'm clicking on OK. And here I'm giving the name as cert web app tutorial, and I'm choosing the runtime stack as .NET 5. I'm choosing the SKU as dev test. If you are doing or creating this web app for a practice or a demo, it is recommended to use dev test because the other pricing types will cost more. I'm choosing dev test over here. I'm clicking on apply, clicking on review and create. Now I'm clicking on create. It will take some time for creation of the web app. Let us come back once the web app is created. The web app is created. I'm clicking on go to resource. I'm copying the URL of the web app and pasting it over here. So the application is ready and running with the default template. Now we have to configure the web app details inside the app registration. So here I'm inside my app registration. I'm going to authentication and here I'm clicking on add a platform, choosing web and pasting the URL. And after that here I'm writing sign in -OIDC, clicking on configure. The details are configured successfully. Now we have to add identity to this app service because in Visual Studio it will use the logged in user details, but for the app service we don't have this kind of functionality. So for that reason we have to add identity to the app service. Here in the app service I'm going to identity and here I'm enabling system assigned identity and clicking on save, clicking on yes. The identity have been assigned. Now I'm going to the Key Vault access policies and here I'm clicking on add access policy. I'm choosing key secret and certificate management and clicking on this none selected for select principal, and here I'm searching for the web app. So this is our web app. I'm clicking on select and clicking on add. Now we have to click on the save button. Now let us deploy our application to the Azure. I'm right clicking on the project and here I'm clicking on publish and here I'm choosing Azure App Service Windows, clicking on next, and here I'm choosing the resource group and the web app, clicking on finish and now clicking on publish. The app published successfully. Now let us access our web app. I'm copying the URL. I'm pasting it over here. Now it is asking for login. I'm entering the user ID, clicking on next and entering the password, clicking on sign in. If for now, yes. Now we could access the web app. How this is working? When the application is running, it uses this Key Vault credentials. And for the web app, we have added an identity, and to this identity in the Key Vault we gave the permissions. So based on all these settings, the application is able to run successfully. If you like this video, please hit that like button and also subscribe to AzureTeach.net for more videos on Azure and .NET.